Copyright disclaimer. Under Title 17 U.S.C. Section 107, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use. Okay, so I'm going to be reading this on my tablet. It comes from asleyness.blog. Confront and Shatter, exposing the truth about Scientology. Scientology, children, and auditing. Religious ritual or abuse, part 4. I'll have to go back and look for the other parts, but for now, this is what I'm going to read. Posted on August 26, 2021 by Helene B. Child abuse means intentional infliction of physical or mental injury upon a child. Leah Remini has noted that for children in the Sea Org, Scientology is the caregiver. Mike Rinder also verified that children are secondary to Sea Org duties and thus are raised by the cult rather than their parents. Children who audit adults are placed in potentially dangerous proximity to obscenity, which classifies as a form of child sexual abuse. A fact by itself that should be enough to concern child advocacy groups and law enforcement. Beyond the question of obscenity, there lies the matter of simply exposing minors to major adult issues, whilst placing them in a position of therapist or caregiver. It has long been established that burdening children and adolescents with grown-up problems, as for instance during a divorce, causes stress, anxiety, and even more serious mental health conditions. When this happens in a familial setting, it is known as parentification. First identified by Bazomone, Nagy, and Spark in 1973 in their groundbreaking book, Invincible Loyalties, Reciprocity in Intergenerational Family Therapy. Parentification is defined as the distortion or lack of boundaries between and among family subsystems, such that children take on roles and responsibilities usually reserved for adults. Two strong articles explaining parentification can be found here and here. I'm going to click on it. That looks interesting. I'm not going to jump into it, though. Relevant to this discussion is that emotional parentification is when the child feels responsible for the emotional well-being of others in the family. Remember that policy or the child Dianetics I was reading yesterday or the day before? How Hubbard basically was turning over all adult responsibilities to the children. So the abuse of children is written into policies in Scientology. and they've been challenged before, and Scientology keeps beating it for some bizarre reason. But that is what needs to be challenged, are the policies. The written policies of child abuse into the fake religion. In this case, the family is Scientology, and by auditing the adults around them, the adults around them, they are absolutely responsible for the well-being of others. Placing a child in the role of caretaker forces them to grow up too fast. What do you think about that, LAPD? It robs them of a chance to be children, to feel safe, nurtured, protected, and cared for. Emotional neglect is also a form of child abuse, and such a burden does cause mental injury to many. Of course, not all are adversely affected, but it should suffice that any child is forced into such a situation. Growing up too quickly, parentified children outlines the dangers facing children who are forced to take on age-inappropriate adult situations. Many parentified children can grow up with higher levels of anxiety, depression, eating disorders, and obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD. D. Kakava, 2005, argues that parentification often sets the child up for failure as they are attempting to perform tasks that are beyond their current capabilities. Oh, so apparently how Hubbard says children can learn all tasks is not age appropriate. Look it up. And internalization of these failures can lead to feelings of shame, depression, and low self-esteem. I personally don't like all these citing of these people, but I'll take the good stuff with it. As Chris Shelton noted, the auditor is 100% responsible for everything that happens during the audit. If that auditor is a child, he or she is the one who must handle any crisis the PC in front of them throws out. Check that out, FBI. Isn't that wild? It's the children's responsibility to handle the crisis. This, too, is damaging abuse. Experts believe this kind of behavior creates an atmosphere of neglect because children are made responsible for looking after the emotional and psychological well-being of the parent while suppressing their normal childhood needs, such as play or friendships with kids their own age. Depriving children of their childhoods, forcing them into adult positions where they are confronted with the confessions of adults, is emotional neglect and therefore abuse. Scientology auditing loses the cover of religious ritual equal to that of other traditional forms of spiritual confession the moment David Miscavige breaks the seal of confidentiality. Well, everyone else too, not just David Miscavige, using the contents of carefully documented and saved personal revelations publicly to attack, abuse, discredit, intimidate, and dehumanize completely nullifies any illusion of religion. Children who are trained as auditors are being placed in potentially dangerous, abusive, age-inappropriate roles that have been shown through research to cause mental injury and long-term psychological harm. Minors who are audited are not only made emotionally, physically, and psychologically vulnerable, but so too are they at real risk of mental illness induced by shame, humiliation, and psychological manipulation. There is enough evidence from former members that interest, concern, and outrage should be raised within law enforcement and child advocacy organizations. It is irresponsible and naive to wait for an isolated incident to present itself when in the meantime the potential for injury exists daily for any number of susceptible minors. Exposing minors to Scientology's auditing is exposing them to an unhealthy, inappropriate, abusive environment. At the least, children are involved in situations no right-thinking parent would ever countenance. At worst, there are the Serge Gills, Miriam Francises, and Saina Kamulas, who today as adults live with Hubbard's crippling legacy. How many more vulnerable children and teens will find themselves re-victimized, like Amy Scobie, blamed for their rape or molestation during an auditing session today? Something must be done about it. I'm probably going to go ahead and check out parts 1, 2, and 3 as well. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and leave the link in the description box. Like and subscribe if you choose. Otherwise, have an amazing day or night wherever you are. Peace.